Formal consultations pertaining to cultural resources began with tribes in North Dakota in the late 1990s. The focus of these initial discussions was on establishing relationships, learning about each other's perspectives, and discussing the mutual obligations and responsibilities of the North Dakota Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration, and tribes within NHPA legislation. These discussions led to the formulation of a programmatic agreement which created a process for consultation and a platform for identifying future needs. It also provided for educational opportunities that have included transportation project classification and parameters put on by NDDOT and federal highway personnel, and sensitivity training for archaeological consultants provided by the tribes.
We have come to realize that one of the greatest advantages of this process is that decisions of value to the agencies and the tribes are made at these meetings that could never be made in isolation.
Hello, I'm Francis Ziegler, Director of the North Dakota Department of Transportation. I want to share my thoughts on our programmatic agreement with the Federal Highway Administration, the regional tribes, and the North Dakota Department of Transportation. Our programmatic agreement established the process for consulting with tribes on cultural resources of importance to them on transportation projects. Our programmatic agreement has created a tribal consultation committee and the guidelines under which that committee operates. The committee meets twice a year to discuss department projects, to refine our processes, and to provide mutually beneficial educational opportunities. Project-specific conclusions result from these committee discussions. Our programmatic agreement is extremely effective from the perspective of creating relationships of respect and trust. It is important to the department because it allows us to work with tribes to consider effects on culturally important resources in project planning. It allows us to consider the tribal perspective at an early stage in project development and to come to mutually satisfactory conclusions. I wish you well in your endeavors and welcome you to our programmatic agreement and tribal consultation process, in the words of those who participated.
I'm one of the first Native American archaeologists still alive. I have participated with the AAA, the SAA. I sat in on the executive of the World Archaeological Congress, traveled all over the world, dealt with governments. I look at this PA. It's what I envisioned 26 years ago that would be possible when I got my first degree in archaeology. At that time I thought, when will be the day when we would see a state or some institution or entity actually begin to invite us to be a part of our cultural history. It was an ownership issue, and that's what this PA is now starting. This PA is saying, yes, there is still an ownership issue, but we're taking the steps now to begin to see the other side of what we have done to the Native people. In other words, taking our cultural history from us and owning it, putting it in museums, putting it in research centers, institutions, libraries. This PA is a very powerful document. It is ensuring that there will be a cooperative working relationship between the tribes and the state of North Dakota with federal involvement, the federal highways. I never thought I would see the day that one would be written like it. And it's only been in the last 10 years that things have changed.
The photograph is a lady named Frances Dinsmore who went around in the early 20th century, and she was well-intentioned, but she was appropriating culture. Why was she appropriating Native culture? Well, she was appropriating it because at that time in the 19th and early 20th century, it was essentially, at least in the Western mind, kind of salvage. There was the sense that indigenous peoples all over the world were somehow going to vanish, and they wanted to grab the little bits and pieces of culture that they could. Now, we all know that that's not true. Indigenous people are still here. Their cultures are still intact. But that's what these folks did. They essentially went out and grabbed what they could and went home and wrote it down. So there's material all over the world that is in archives and museums that's probably wrong.
There's a very key part to that, and I want to say this for posterity. When you take your history from a people, you effectively kill them because they have no past. So they have no foundation for their present. And then they cannot design a future. So that's a very heavy statement to make, but I'm saying that for posterity, perhaps for generations in the future that may see this.
I think you've got to start with good people. I think you've got to have the genuine commitment from the agencies. If you want to work with tribes, I think you've got to go out beyond compliance and build a trust and a foundation for trust. And that is going out of your way. I think federal agencies don't have the time or the funding. But if you want to make it work in the long term, you've got to build that trust relationship. Well, I think really the difference was the 100% participation of the parties involved, so that you felt a role and a responsibility in the creation of this particular PA.
The process provided for in the regulations implementing Section 106 includes consultation with the Indian tribes. It provides for an opportunity to state their concerns and advise on the identification, evaluation, and treatment of historic properties, including those of religious and cultural significance.
In government, it's pretty difficult to get things done without establishing strong relationships. We're getting all the tribal governments involved in our transportation planning. And they're looking at all of the plans from a statewide perspective. They get together as a group and they look at what we're attempting to do in transportation. It's really no different than hiring a consultant engineer to work on a project. What we're doing is we're bringing in the experts, the cultural resource folks from each of the tribes. We're consulting with them and we're gaining their knowledge and their experience on each one of their reservations. Providing them funding to do that is, again, like I say, no different than having a consultant engineer do the engineering on a project.
In the early 90s, 92, 93, when the law was amended, I was in a position with the DOT. Mostly at that time we carried projects, or I carried projects and maps. I can remember several instances of driving into the reservation, not really knowing where to go, who to contact. Other than I had a job to do, we had a project and we were supposed to consult with tribes. I felt that rather than to send letters, that I needed to get out to the people themselves. It was not only the right thing to do, it was what I wanted to do as an individual. And to learn. I'm an anthropologist first and an archaeologist second. People is, or are, what I'm interested in. All people. And I have a philosophy that I guess we all developed. The older I get, the more I adhere to that philosophy of understanding.
And I think the document that we have in front of us today, the programmatic agreement, is very unique because there's not another one anywhere in the nation right now that brings individuals with not only the capacity to resolve certain differences in relation to impacts to cultural sites, but more importantly, how we can resolve them in a manner that's consistent with the process and to the betterment of our preservation of cultural sites that we're losing every day.
From the first time I started talking with tribal people about cultural resources in North Dakota, I heard we have to have tribal monitors out with the archaeologists, because the archaeologists aren't finding everything, because they aren't understanding what's important to us. As an archaeologist 20 years ago, I wasn't in favor of it. We were afraid that we would have unqualified people. We were afraid that it would delay projects. We were afraid that it would cost a lot of money. We were concerned that there might be conflicts that would be difficult to resolve. Through consultation in this process and getting to know each other, our fears were quelled. We came to understand that the concerns were real and that having tribal monitors in the field would solve more problems for us than it would create.
The agencies involved not only dealt with local tribes, but they allowed outsiders to come in from surrounding states, spiritual people, cultural people that weren't directly associated with the THPOs, but were brought to the table and they were allowed to speak. I'm a graduate from an accredited university in anthropology, and one of the things that I can bring up is I've never had a spiritual leader or a cultural leader from any tribe at the university. I've never had any of their insight or learned from them. By bringing them in, not only were the agencies, state or federal, learning, but the other tribal people were learning from these spiritual leaders also. In my dealings with state and federal agencies, one of the biggest responses was, I didn't know, we didn't know. And I can name a few of them where they didn't even realize what they were doing. They thought they were doing the proper thing. And when all was said and done, when they listened to some of the tribal members speak on a certain issue, their reply was, we didn't know. I'll never be afraid to listen to tribal elders or tribal people.
Trust is what we've developed, and that's so vitally important to a programmatic agreement, is that the parties have established that trust, and we can work with that to further enhance our relationships and understanding of each party's roles.
We had a very democratic process from a long time ago. Like, as even the chiefs were only able to rule, or their word was listened to, as long as they could persuade the people. And if they couldn't persuade the people, then people looked elsewhere. Coming together with other entities, I think that's kind of a traditional thing, I guess, where we put aside our own personal needs for the good of the group. I think that's something that's inherent, that we try to see other people's points of view.
It's unprecedented. There isn't something to match it with. You've gone beyond what was in the confrontational, in the adversarial, in the prejudicial, in the racism. That's the only reference you can have from the past. I know I was there, was involved in trying to find median dialogue or median ground. It didn't work. Not until the last 10 years or so. You're seeing something that hasn't been before. I mean, you guys are younger in your generation. You're seeing something here. I'm telling you that.
I think DOT really hit the light on this one. And a lot of tribes that I've been in contact with are really now looking at what DOT has here as a model. And I think that's because of the efforts we put together in understanding each one's setting in relation to our authority and responsibility, but more importantly, being open and having that trust mechanism established. Because if you don't have trust, you don't have nothing with tribes.
The programmatic agreement was signed at a ceremony in Bismarck on November 28, 2006 by representatives of the Federal Highway Administration, the North Dakota Department of Transportation, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate, and Lower Sioux Indian Community. Additional tribes are currently signatories to the agreement, including the Spirit Lake Dakota Nation, the Mandan Hidatsa Arikara Nation, the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, the Fort Peck Assiniboine and Sioux tribes, the Northern Cheyenne tribe, the Apsaluk Crow Nation, and the Santee Sioux tribe, and the Wakbekute Band of Dakota. Additional tribes participate in meetings and anticipate becoming signatories to the programmatic agreement in the near future, the Rosebud Sioux tribe and the Oglala Sioux tribe.